My wife criticized me 46 times in 1 week until I exposed every insult and walked away, shocking all who never saw the truth behind closed doors. My wife criticized me this week, and I kept count of every single one. You might think I'm exaggerating, but I started writing them down after Monday, when she managed to find fault with how I buttered my toast. Apparently, I was doing it wrong. Who knew there was a wrong way to spread butter on bread? By Tuesday, she'd criticized how I loaded the dishwasher, how I tied my shoes, and how I said good morning to our 17-year-old son. Wednesday brought complaints about my driving, my laugh being too loud during a phone call, and the way I folded the laundry. She even criticized how I breathed too heavily while watching TV. Yes, my breathing was apparently disruptive to her evening routine. Thursday was a masterpiece of fault-finding. She criticized my choice of shirt, how I chewed my cereal, the way I opened the mail, how I parked the car, and even how I said thank you to the grocery store clerk. According to her, I wasn't grateful enough. The clerk seemed perfectly fine with my level of gratitude, but what do I know? Friday morning started with criticism number 28 about how I made coffee, too strong apparently. Then came complaints about how I walked down the stairs, how I organized my desk, how I answered the phone, and how I put on my jacket. By Friday evening, we were at 35 criticisms, and I was starting to see a pattern that had nothing to do with my actual behavior. The weekend should have been a break, but Saturday brought 10 more. How I mowed the lawn, how I talked to the neighbor, how I sat in my chair, how I held the TV remote, how I ate my sandwich, how I closed the front door, how I washed my hands, how I adjusted the thermostat, how I put away groceries, and how I said good night. Each criticism was delivered with that tone that suggested I was somehow defective as a human being. Sunday afternoon, I was at 45 criticisms, and we were hosting a small barbecue for the neighbors. I thought maybe being around other people would give me a break from the constant commentary on my existence. I was wrong, dead wrong. I was outside trying to get the grill started when she appeared beside me with that look. You know the one, the look that says you're about to be informed of your latest failure. The neighbors were standing around, drinks in hand, making small talk and watching me work with the charcoal starter. Honestly, you can't even light a simple grill, she announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. Look at him struggling with something a 12-year-old could figure out. This is embarrassing. The conversation around us stopped. Mrs. Patterson from next door shifted uncomfortably. Bob from across the street suddenly found his beer bottle fascinating. I could feel their eyes on me, waiting to see how I'd respond to being publicly humiliated over a barbecue grill that was actually lighting just fine. But I didn't respond. Not yet. I just smiled, nodded, and continued with the grill. Because in that moment, I realized something important. This wasn't about the grill, or the coffee, or how I breathe, or any of the other 45 things she'd found wrong with me this week. This was about respect. And I'd been allowing someone to disrespect me in my own home, in front of my son, and now in front of our neighbors. The grill flared to life perfectly, casting dancing shadows across everyone's faces. I stood up, dusted off my hands, and looked around at our guests, who were still processing what they just witnessed. Some looked embarrassed for me, others looked uncomfortable. But I wasn't embarrassed anymore. I was done, completely done. I wasn't going to make a scene at our barbecue. I was going to handle this the right way, at the right time, with the right approach. Because a man who respects himself doesn't accept being torn down piece by piece, criticism by criticism, day after day. The meat started sizzling on the grill, and I could already feel something shifting inside me, not something broken or defeated, but something powerful and decisive. Something that had been building all week with each carefully documented criticism. 45 criticisms down. But I had a feeling that tomorrow morning would bring number 46. And when it did, she was going to discover that this particular target had finally decided to remove himself from her shooting range. Monday morning arrived like any other day, except I woke up with a strange sense of anticipation. I knew criticism number 46 was coming. It was just a matter of when and what ridiculous thing would trigger it this time. I didn't have to wait long. I was in the kitchen making breakfast when our 17-year-old son walked in, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He grabbed a bowl from the cabinet and started pouring cereal. Normal morning routine, nothing unusual. Then she walked in. "Look at your father," she said to our son, her voice dripping with that familiar contempt. "Look how he's standing there making eggs, shoulders slouched, moving like he's got nowhere important to be. This is what happens when a man has no real ambition or drive." Our son looked up from his cereal, confused. I kept cooking, waiting to see where this was heading. "You're 17 now. she continued, addressing our son while gesturing toward me like I was some kind of cautionary tale. Don't grow up to be like him. Look at how he shuffles around this kitchen. No confidence, no presence. He's a terrible example of what a man should be. There it was. Criticism number 46. But this one was different. This one crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. She'd criticize my breathing, my walking, my eating, my working, my everything. But involving our son, using me as a negative example to our own child, that was a declaration of war. I turned off the burner and set down my spatula. My son was staring at his cereal, clearly uncomfortable with being put in the middle of whatever this was. The kid didn't deserve to be used as ammunition in her ongoing campaign to tear me down. Son, I said calmly, finish your breakfast and get ready for school. He nodded quickly and left the kitchen, grateful for the escape. Smart kid. He could feel the electricity in the air. I turned to face her. She was standing there with that smug expression, like she'd just delivered some profound wisdom about life and masculinity, like she'd done our son some great service by pointing out his father's supposed inadequacies. We need to talk, I said. About what? She replied. About how you can't handle a little constructive criticism? About how sensitive you've become? I almost laughed. Constructive criticism. That's what she was calling it. 46 calculated attacks on everything from how I existed to how I breathed, culminating in her using our child as a weapon against me. Tonight, I said. After dinner, we're going to have a conversation about the future of this marriage. She rolled her eyes. Oh, here we go with the drama. You're being ridiculous. I was just trying to motivate you to be better. Better. As if there was something fundamentally wrong with me that needed fixing. As if I were some broken machine that required her constant maintenance and adjustment to function properly. 7 o'clock, I said. We'll talk then. The rest of the day I made calls, 3 calls to be precise. The first was to a lawyer I'd researched months ago but never contacted. The second was to my brother, asking if I could stay at his place for a few days if needed. The third was to a friend who worked in real estate. I wasn't making these calls out of anger or impulse. I was making them because a man who respects himself doesn't allow anyone, not even his wife, to systematically destroy his dignity in front of his own child. There are lines you don't cross, and she had just crossed the biggest one. When I got home from work, she was in the living room watching TV like nothing had happened, like she hadn't spent the morning assassinating my character to our son, like the past week of constant criticism was just normal married life. Our son was doing homework at the kitchen table. I helped him with a math problem, and he seemed relieved that I was acting normal. Kids pick up on tension, and he'd been walking on eggshells around the house for weeks. After dinner, she settled into her usual spot on the couch, probably expecting me to retreat to my office like I normally did when she made the living room uncomfortable. Instead, I sat down across from her. So, she said without looking away from the TV, are we going to have your dramatic conversation now? We are, I said. But first, I want you to know that I've been keeping track of something this week. She finally looked at me, eyebrow raised. Keeping track of what? I pulled out my phone and opened the Notes app where I'd been documenting everything. Your criticisms. I've been counting them. She laughed, actually laughed. You've been counting my criticisms? That's the most pathetic thing I've ever heard. 46, I said. That's how many times you've criticized me since last Monday. 46 separate instances of you finding fault with how I exist. Maybe if you didn't give me so much to criticize, I wouldn't have to point out your problems. There it was. Her defense was that I deserved it, that I was so fundamentally flawed that constant criticism was not only justified, but necessary. This morning was number 46, I continued. When you told our son that I was a terrible example of manhood, when you used our child as a weapon in your personal war against my self-esteem, I was teaching him what not to become, she interrupted. You were teaching him that it's acceptable to tear down the people you're supposed to love. She was quiet for a moment, and I could see her calculating her next move, but I wasn't done. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice steady and clear. Tomorrow morning I'm going to make some calls, and by the end of this week, you're going to understand exactly what it costs to spend your days tearing down a man who spent 15 years trying to build a life with you. The laugh died on her lips. For the first time in months, she was actually listening. Tuesday evening, I sent out invitations, not for a party or casual get-together. This was business. I invited her parents, my brother and his wife, and our 2 closest couple friends. The message was simple: family dinner this Saturday. Important discussion about our future. 7 p.m. She saw me sending the messages and asked what I was planning. I told her we were having people over for dinner. She seemed pleased, probably thinking I was trying to smooth things over after our conversation. She had no idea what was coming. I spent the week preparing, not just the meal, but my presentation. I organized my list of 46 criticisms into categories: personal attacks, public humiliation, parenting interference, and general disrespect. I printed everything out, clean and professional, like a business report, because that's exactly what this was, a performance review of our marriage. Saturday arrived, and she was in a great mood. She'd made her famous pasta salad and was chatting happily with everyone as they arrived. Her parents looked pleased to see us hosting together. My brother gave me a knowing look. He'd heard enough phone calls over the years to understand the situation. Dinner went smoothly. She was charming, telling stories and laughing with everyone. This was the version of herself she presented to the world: funny, engaging, thoughtful. If only our guests could see the version of her that existed behind closed doors. After dessert, I stood up and cleared my throat. Thank you all for coming tonight. I asked you here because I wanted to share something important with the people who matter most to us. She looked at me, curiously, still smiling. She probably thought I was about to make some romantic speech about our marriage, or announce a vacation we were planning. Over the past few months, I've been documenting something, I began, pulling out my folder. And I think it's important that the people who care about our family understand what's been happening in this house. Her smile faltered slightly. She was smart enough to sense that this wasn't going where she expected. This week, I kept a detailed record of every criticism directed at me by my wife. I want to share some examples with you so you can understand the environment that's been created in our home. The room went completely silent. Her father shifted uncomfortably in his chair. My brother leaned forward, interested. Monday, criticized for how I butter toast, how I load the dishwasher, and how I said good morning to our son. Tuesday, criticized for my driving, my laugh being too loud, and how I fold laundry. Wednesday, how I breathe while watching television was apparently disruptive. I continued reading, methodically going through each day. Her mother's face changed as she heard the list. These weren't constructive suggestions or helpful feedback. These were attacks on basic human functions. By Friday evening, we were at 35 criticisms, but Saturday brought something new during our barbecue with the neighbors. I looked directly at her parents. I was publicly humiliated for not being able to light a grill that was actually working perfectly, called incompetent in front of people we have to face every day. Her father was frowning now. He was an old-school man who understood respect and dignity. But Sunday morning brought the final criticism. Number 46. I paused, making sure everyone was paying attention. She told our 17-year-old son that his father was a terrible example of manhood, used me as a cautionary tale of what not to become. The silence in the room was deafening. Her mother was staring at her daughter like she was seeing a stranger. My brother's wife looked genuinely shocked. These aren't isolated incidents, I continued. This represents 1 week of documented behavior in a pattern that's been going on for months. 46 criticisms in 7 days. That's an average of over 6 attacks on my character, abilities, or basic human functions every single day. She finally found her voice. You're taking everything out of context. You're making me sound like some kind of monster. I'm not making you sound like anything, I replied calmly. I'm simply sharing the facts. 46 documented criticisms in 1 week, culminating in involving our child in your campaign to tear down his father. Her father spoke up. Is this true? Did you really say that about him to the boy? She looked around the table, realizing that her audience was no longer on her side. I was trying to motivate him to be better. By telling our son his father is a failure? My brother asked. That's your idea of motivation? You don't understand, she said, her voice getting defensive. He's become so complacent, so lazy. Someone has to push him to improve. I opened my folder again. Let me read you some specific examples of this motivation. Criticism number 12, you chew your cereal too loudly. Criticism number 18, you breathe too heavily while watching TV. Criticism number 23, you say thank you wrong to store clerks. Her mother was shaking her head. Honey, these aren't reasonable complaints. They're not complaints, I said. They're systematic attacks designed to make me feel inadequate in my own home. And they worked. For a while. Until I realized that a man who respects himself doesn't accept being treated like a defective appliance that needs constant adjustment. The room was completely quiet except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. Everyone was processing what they'd heard. These weren't marriage problems or communication issues. This was emotional warfare disguised as helpful criticism. "I wanted you all to understand what's been happening here," I said, "because you're about to witness the consequences of crossing a line that should never be crossed. When you attack a man's relationship with his own child, when you use that child as a weapon in your personal war against his self-esteem, you've declared that this marriage is over." She was staring at me now, finally understanding that this wasn't a dinner party. This was a reckoning. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "This is ridiculous. You're all sitting here acting like I'm some kind of villain because I try to help my husband improve himself." Her voice was getting higher, more defensive. She was realizing that her usual tactics weren't working with an audience of people who had just heard 46 examples of her behavior. "Help me improve?" I asked, staying seated and calm. "Let's examine that defense. Criticism number 7. You walked down the stairs wrong. Can you explain to everyone here how walking downstairs incorrectly was hindering my personal growth?" She waved her hand dismissively. "You were being loud, stomping around like an elephant." At 7 o'clock in the morning, wearing socks on carpeted stairs, I clarified. "But let's continue. Criticism number 19. You hold the TV remote wrong." How was my remote holding technique preventing me from reaching my full potential? You were clicking too aggressively." My brother let out a short laugh. He couldn't help himself. The idea that someone could hold a remote control wrong was beyond absurd. "Criticism number 31, I continued, was about how I opened the mail. Apparently, I was doing that wrong too. Can you demonstrate the correct way to open mail for everyone?" Her father was watching his daughter with growing concern. "Sweetheart, these don't sound like helpful suggestions. These sound like what?" She snapped at him. "Like you're trying to control every aspect of how a grown man exists," her mother said quietly. "Like you're treating him like a child who needs constant correction." "He acts like a child," she shot back. "Someone has to be the adult in this relationship." I pulled out another sheet from my folder. "Let's talk about acting like a child. Here's a pattern I noticed. Every single criticism was delivered in front of someone else. Our son heard 12 of them. The neighbors heard the barbecue incident. Store clerks, repair technicians, delivery drivers, all witnessed me being corrected for breathing, walking, talking, or existing incorrectly." Her face was getting red now. She wasn't used to being challenged, especially not in front of people whose opinions mattered to her. "You're being way too sensitive," she said. "Marriage is about helping each other grow. If you can't handle honest feedback, that says more about you than it does about me." "Honest feedback," I repeated. "Is that what you call telling our son that his father is a terrible example of manhood? Was that honest feedback, or was that you trying to poison my relationship with my own child? I was protecting him from learning your bad habits." The words hung in the air like a confession. She had just admitted that she saw me as so fundamentally flawed that our son needed protection from my influence. Her father stood up slowly. He was a man from a different generation, one that understood respect and dignity in marriage. "That's enough," he said to his daughter. "What you just said, that's not a wife talking about her husband. That's someone who has no respect for the man she married. Dad, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," he interrupted. "I've been married to your mother for 42 years. We've had our disagreements, our fights, our problems. But I have never, not once, tried to turn our children against her. And she's never tried to turn them against me." My brother nodded. "I've been watching this for years, the little comments, the public corrections, the way you talk to him like he's incompetent. We all have. We just didn't know how bad it had gotten." She looked around the table, realizing that her support system was crumbling. These people had just heard 46 documented examples of behavior they couldn't defend. "You're all overreacting," she said, but her voice was weaker now. "Every marriage has criticism. Every couple goes through rough patches. This isn't criticism," her mother said sadly. "This is systematic humiliation. I raised you better than this." "Let me ask you something," I said to her. "In the past month, can you think of a single positive thing you've said to me? One compliment, one expression of appreciation, one acknowledgement that I might be doing something right?" She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it. The silence stretched on. "That's what I thought," I continued. 46 criticisms in 1 week. But you can't remember the last time you said something kind to the man you married. I don't have to sit here and listen to this ambush, she said, looking around for support that wasn't coming. Actually, you do, I said firmly. Because this is your intervention. This is what happens when you cross the line from being a wife to being a constant critic. When you use our child as ammunition against me, you declared war on this family. Our friend David, who'd been quiet through most of this, finally spoke up. I have to ask, why would you tell your son his father is a bad example? What did you hope to accomplish with that? She looked at him desperately, like he might provide the support she wasn't getting from her own family. I want better for him. I don't want him to grow up thinking it's okay to be mediocre. Mediocre? I asked. Is that what you think of me? After 15 years of marriage, after building a life together, after raising a son together, I'm mediocre? I didn't mean... Yes, you did, I said. And that's exactly the problem. You see me as a fixer-upper project instead of as your husband. You see every normal human behavior as something that needs correction. And when I don't transform into whatever impossible standard you've created in your head, you punish me with constant criticism. The room was completely quiet. Everyone could see the truth of what was happening. This wasn't a marriage, it was a daily performance review where I could never score high enough to earn basic respect. Here's what's going to happen, I said, standing up. Tomorrow morning, you're going to discover what life looks like when you finally succeed in driving away the man you've spent months trying to fix. Sunday morning, I was up early packing my essentials. I'd already arranged to stay at my brother's place while things got sorted out. The lawyer I consulted on Tuesday had given me clear advice about protecting myself legally and financially. I wasn't acting out of emotion anymore. This was strategic and calculated. She came downstairs as I was loading my car, still in her pajamas, looking confused and slightly panicked. The reality of the previous evening was starting to sink in. What are you doing? She asked, though the answer was obvious. I'm leaving, I said simply, closing the trunk. I told you last night what was going to happen. You can't be serious. You're really going to break up our family over some criticism? Some criticism. Even now she was minimizing what she'd done. 46 documented attacks on my character in 1 week was just some criticism. I'm not breaking up our family, I said. I'm removing myself from a situation where I'm treated like a defective appliance that needs constant repair. Our son appeared in the doorway, looking worried. He'd heard enough of the previous evening to understand that something major was happening. Where are you going? He asked. I'm staying at your uncle's place for a while, I told him. Your mother and I need some time apart to figure things out. He nodded, but I could see the questions in his eyes. Smart kid. He'd been watching the dynamic in our house for months. Can I call you? He asked. Anytime, I said. Nothing about this changes my relationship with you. You're my son, and I love you. But I won't stay in a house where I'm disrespected every day. She was getting desperate now. This is ridiculous. We can work this out. We can go to counseling. Counseling? I asked. You want to sit in a room with a therapist and explain how my breathing patterns need improvement? How my stair-walking technique requires professional intervention? I know I've been difficult lately, but marriages work. You don't just give up when things get hard. Things didn't get hard, I corrected her. You got mean. There's a difference. Hard is financial problems, health issues, family crises. Mean is attacking your husband's character 6 times a day and using your child as a weapon against him. She started crying then, but these weren't tears of genuine remorse. These were tears of someone who had just realized they'd pushed too far and were about to face consequences. Please don't do this, she said. I can change. I can be better. You had 15 years to be better, I said. Instead, you got progressively worse. And when I finally stood up for myself, you called it being oversensitive. My brother pulled up in his truck. He'd offered to help with the move and provide moral support. He got out and nodded at me, then looked at her with obvious disapproval. Ready? He asked. Almost, I said, then turned back to her. I've already spoken with a lawyer. You'll be hearing from him this week. I'm not asking for much. Just a clean separation and shared custody of our son. You can't take him away from me, she said, panic creeping into her voice. I'm not taking him away from you. I'm making sure he has at least one parent who treats him with respect. Someone who doesn't use him as ammunition in personal conflicts. She looked around desperately, like she was searching for some argument that would make this all go away. Your parents won't understand. Everyone will think you're having a midlife crisis. Actually, I said, after last night, I think everyone understands perfectly. Your own parents saw what you've become. Your own mother told you that what you're doing isn't normal marriage behavior. I picked up my last bag and looked at the house we'd shared for 8 years. It should have felt sad leaving behind all those memories. Instead, it felt like finally exhaling after holding my breath for months. Here's what I want you to understand, I said, facing her one last time. A man who respects himself doesn't accept being torn down every single day by the person who's supposed to love him. You turned our home into a courtroom where I was always on trial for existing incorrectly. But I love you, she said weakly. No, you don't, I replied. You love the idea of who you think I could become if you criticized me enough. You love the project of fixing me, but you don't love me. You've made that clear with every criticism, every public humiliation, every attempt to reprogram how I walk, breathe, and exist. My brother was loading my stuff into his truck, giving us space to finish this conversation. Last week, you crossed a line when you involved our son, I continued. You tried to turn him against me, to poison his respect for his father. That wasn't criticism, that was sabotage. And that's when I knew this marriage was over. She was crying harder now, but I didn't feel guilty. These were the consequences of her choices. Every criticism, every public humiliation, every attempt to make me feel inadequate had led to this moment. I'll call you about arrangements for picking up the rest of my things, I said, walking toward the truck. And I'll call our son tonight to make sure he's okay. Please, she called after me, we can fix this. I promise I'll change. I stopped and turned back one last time. You had 46 chances to change just this week. You chose to double down instead. You chose to involve our child. You chose to make me the villain in front of our dinner guests when I presented facts about your behavior. I got into the passenger seat of my brother's truck. As we drove away, I could see her standing in the driveway, still in her pajamas, probably still not understanding how holding a remote control wrong or breathing too loudly while watching TV could lead to the end of a marriage. But it wasn't about the remote control or the breathing. It was about respect. And I'd finally remembered that I deserved some. 3 months later, I was sitting in my new place, a small but comfortable house I'd rented across town, having coffee with my son before school. He'd been staying with me every other week, and the difference in our relationship was remarkable. Dad, he said, looking up from his homework, can I ask you something? Always, I said. Why did you stay so long? I mean, listening to all that criticism every day, why didn't you leave sooner? It was a fair question. A 17-year-old had recognized what had taken me months to fully understand. Because I thought that's what marriage was supposed to be, I told him honestly. I thought if someone you love points out your flaws, you're supposed to work on them. I didn't realize there's a difference between helpful feedback and systematic destruction. He nodded thoughtfully. She still asks me to tell you she wants to talk. What do you tell her? That you're happier now. Because you are. He was right. I was happier. Not because the marriage was over, but because I'd remembered who I was before I became someone's full-time improvement project. The phone rang. It was my brother calling to check in, something he'd been doing regularly since I moved out. How's the peace and quiet? He asked. Strange at first, I admitted. I kept waiting for someone to tell me I was drinking my coffee wrong or sitting in my chair incorrectly. He laughed. And now? Now I realize how exhausting it was living under constant evaluation. I forgot what it felt like to just exist without being criticized for how I was doing it. After my son left for school, I reviewed some emails from work. My productivity had actually improved since the separation. Turns out, when you're not spending mental energy bracing for the next criticism at home, you have more focus for everything else. My phone buzzed with a text from her. Can we please talk? I've been thinking about everything you said. I'd received dozens of similar messages over the past 3 months. Promises to change, requests for counseling, attempts to minimize what had happened. I'd stopped responding after the first few weeks. The truth was, I didn't hate her. I just recognized that she was someone who needed to control and criticize to feel secure in a relationship. And I was someone who needed respect and acceptance to thrive in one. Those two needs were fundamentally incompatible. My neighbor knocked on the door, an older gentleman who'd become a friend over the past few months. Morning, he said. Wanted to thank you again for helping with my fence last weekend. No problem, I said. Happy to help. You know, he continued. My wife and I were talking. We've noticed how different you seem since you moved in. More relaxed, more yourself, if that makes sense. It made perfect sense. For the first time in years, I wasn't performing an endless audition for someone's approval. I could breathe loudly during movies, walk downstairs at whatever pace felt natural, and hold remote controls however I wanted. Later that afternoon, I met with a lawyer to finalize some paperwork. The divorce was proceeding smoothly. She'd initially tried to claim I was abandoning the family, but the documentation I'd kept of her behavior had made that argument impossible to sustain. "How are you feeling about everything?" the lawyer asked as we wrapped up. "Relieved," I said. I spent so long thinking I was the problem that I forgot what it felt like to be treated with basic respect. That evening, my son called to tell me about his day. These conversations had become one of my favorite parts of the routine. Without the tension in the house, without him being used as a weapon in our conflicts, our relationship had actually grown stronger. "She asked me again if I thought you'd come back," he said. "What did you tell her?" "The truth, that you're not the same person who left. You're more confident now. You stand up straighter, you laugh more." He was right again. I had changed. Not because someone criticized me into improvement, but because I'd finally removed myself from a situation that was slowly eroding my sense of self-worth. "Dad," he said before hanging up, "I'm proud of you for leaving. I know that sounds weird, but watching you get criticized every day, it was hard. I'm glad you finally said enough was enough." After we hung up, I sat on my porch with a beer watching the sunset. My phone buzzed again with another message from her, but I didn't check it. Whatever she had to say, I'd heard it all before. The truth was simple. Some people bring out the best in you, and some people bring out the worst. She'd spent months bringing out my worst, making me defensive, insecure, and constantly second-guessing myself. Now, on my own, I was rediscovering the person I'd been before I became someone's daily improvement project. A man who respects himself doesn't accept being torn down piece by piece, criticism by criticism, day after day. It had taken me 46 documented criticisms and one final attack on my relationship with my son to remember that truth, but I'd remembered it and I'd acted on it. And for the first time in months, I could breathe as loudly as I wanted while watching TV in my own home, without anyone telling me I was doing it wrong. Our story has come to an end. If you've made it this far, how about subscribing to our channel? It helps us immensely. I've selected 2 other videos for you that I'm sure you'll enjoy. Feel free to click on them. I'll be waiting for you in the next story. See you soon.